the early editions of the guide, 2012, 2014, they were inspiring, and they were sort of very visual. They had photographs and renderings. It's amazing that, 10, 12 years later, how dated they started to look. And now that you can compare them to the visuals that you see in this guide, it's really just multiple levels ahead. So great to combine great technical information with really clear, inspiring visuals. These sort of axonometric views that you have here will line up with a plan view in its color scheme and layout that really kind of walk you through and so bring you from a vision of what you could have to how to get there. And that's really, so what we've been saying about this guide, that prior versions might have been like a kit of parts. Here's the elements of your bike lanes that you might have, whips and stencils and things. This new one is really a how-to guide, right? It also provides the steps in the recipe, not just the elements and the ingredients. So that up-leveling that you see visually and content is what excites me.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Zimmerman, and that is Ryan Russo, Director of NACTO, the National Association for City Transportation Officials. We're going to be talking a little bit about NACTO and the organization and what that is all about, but we're also going to be introducing the brand new bicycle design guide, the Urban Design Guide right here. It's wonderful to have this out. This is the third edition of the Bicycle Design Guide. But before we get right into that, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page. Okay, let's get right to it with Ryan. Ryan Russo, so wonderful to have you on the Active Towns podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really, really exciting to be here.
I've been wanting to do this for some time. Corinne and I had been working and scheming on getting her on before she stepped down and moved on. But I was delighted when I heard that you came on board to the helm of NACTO. And we're going to talk a little bit about NACTO in just a bit. But I want to pause just for a moment and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So who the heck is Ryan Russo?
Thanks, John. I'm Ryan Russo. I'm the executive director of NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which we'll talk about. But I'm an urban planner by background, and I've spent most of my career at NACTO agencies, nearly 14 years at the New York City Department of Transportation, and then 5 years leading a new Department of Transportation in the city of Oakland, California, known as OakDOT. And so most of my career and work has been focused on redesigning the rights of way, the public property between the property lines, streets and sidewalks for the benefit of people, trying to prevent traffic collisions, trying to develop more equitable communities, trying to make our transportation system and cities more sustainable and more connected.
Fantastic. What was kind of the origin story for you in terms of what got you, kind of inspired to dive deep into this, kind of portion of this world?
Well, I guess a number of things that I could go quickly through. One is that I did grow up in a really walkable mainline rail suburb on Long Island in New York. And I could travel around in my neighborhood, but it turned out all my friends were on the other side of a very large arterial named Jericho Turnpike, and I was not allowed to cross that street. And so while I could bike around and walk around my neighborhood, I actually had no one to connect with and play with because they were all on the other side of that arterial. So that's a sort of a inner child sort of origin story, but really it picked up when I had my first job out of college in New York City. I was living in Manhattan, and I started to get exposed to urban transportation issues, the advocacy group Transportation Alternatives, saw their newsletter. I signed up for a couple of charity bike rides. I actually started rollerblading from the Upper East Side to Midtown Manhattan down an avenue with no bike lanes to get to work. That
I
was my
love
college
it.
graduation gift.
That's great.
And so I was just sort of rolling around and living a 20-something life in New York City and fell in love with kind of the urbanism of it, and then started to get exposed to urban history and started to learn that there was some intentional policies that had been done that had really hurt our cities and hurt our communities. Suburbanization, redlining, highway development, eminent domain, and that we had segregated ourselves, separated ourselves, exacerbated inequality, and that there was basically like a profession that was ostensibly part of the solution that could work to make cities the reverse: connected, equitable, sustainable, vibrant. And once I found out that that could be an actual career, I was like, I could do this for work. I was off and running.
Yeah, yeah. I can tell just by the way you answered that too. It's like, the passion of like, this is all starting to connect together. And it's like, this is cool. This is really an interesting, fascinating area. And you had the good fortune of being there in New York City during one of the most exciting times for the city, at least, from this perspective of urbanism and active transportation. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Oh, it's funny. I've actually I've started to answer this question. I've gotten it a couple of times that I feel like a bit of the Forrest Gump of urban planning. I was sort of in the room where it happened, sort of randomly. I joined the New York City Department of Transportation with a real kind of bike ped focusing on a rezoning plan for downtown Brooklyn in 2003. And the agency had a very strong reputation for being pretty, many DOTs around the country, focusing on the throughput of motor vehicles as its priority. But there were some great people inside, and we started to do some great work. But then in 2007, with the release of PlaNYC under the leadership of Mayor Michael Bloomberg and the appointment of Jeanette Sata-Khan as the New York City DOT Transportation Commissioner, I was sort of already there for a couple of years doing this kind of work when the leadership sort of charted a course for that kind of 180-degree turn to where the vision had to be for a transportation system that was much more multimodal and really placed right-of-way management and street management in the framework of New York City rebuilding from the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and a vision for transportation management in the context of public space, public investment, economic development, and overall growth. It was PlaNYC was a sustainability plan. It envisioned 1 million more New Yorkers by 2030, and said, if we're going to have 1 million more New Yorkers, it didn't make sense to move each one of them around in a single occupant vehicle. So I was there when that sort of big policy and leadership and vision shift happened, and got tapped to help execute it. And so was incredibly lucky to be, the person who, when they said, hey, let's try to do 200 miles of bike lanes in 3 years, let's try to do the first parking protected bike lanes in North America, it was sort of my team's responsibility to try to get those things done. So felt very lucky at that time.
Yeah, I love it. That's so cool to hear that. Yeah, you were there already. Then they kind of came in and like really, was able to put some wind underneath your wings and be able to really do some pretty cool stuff. And really, I'm sure, helped propel you to that next opportunity to be the first director of the Department of Transportation for the city of Oakland. I'm assuming that prior to there being a DOT there, it probably all just fit under like a generalized public works department. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. New York City, a city of 8.5 million, cities like Chicago, LA often have these DOTs in which, traffic signals, striping, stop signs, the sort of these right-of-way management functions are in a dedicated agency. In more medium-sized cities like in Oakland, 440,000 people, you'll frequently have the right-of-way managed within a public works department that is also working to build and maintain public parks, libraries, police stations, firehouses,
sewer systems,
and city-owned assets.
Yeah.
So in 2017, the newly elected Oakland mayor, Libby Schaaf, had the vision and leadership and wanted to basically kind of join the NACTO community, the movement of cities that saw right-of-way management as, a way to pursue a community's values, to say, like, if safety, equity, sustainability, community trust are lead values, like, this is 30% of the land in the city. So let's not just think of the streets and sidewalks as something we maintain, but let's think of it as something that can advance those values. How can we save money for residents as they get to work and school? How can we keep them safe? How can we repair from past harms that policy has created inequities? And so in Oakland, there was a reorganization to create that dedicated department of managing the right-of-way. It was a DOT. We named it OakDOT. And I was tapped, again, incredibly fortunate to be tapped to be the first permanent director of OakDOT.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar story, of course, here to in Austin, where I believe it was just right around 2014 when the same thing happened as they moved forward to create a Department of Transportation and kind of had it merge away from Public Works as time has gone on. They've kind of come back together again. And so now it's Public Works and Transportation. But yeah, it is interesting to see how that happens, because there is, and you said it quite eloquently there, when you're sort of like piling all of this stuff, including the water systems and sewer and all these other functions that are typically under Public Works, it's nice to be able to have a dedicated department that's really thinking through transportation and mobility issues. And then really, some of the stuff that we'll talk about too later on here is also looking at building out systems and programs that help reverse car dependency. And so that's a big part, I think, of what we're seeing when we look at the new generation of what these cities are doing. And you sort of channeled it earlier of talking about the NACTO cities and, how these organizations, these cities, these municipalities are coming together and under, kind of this umbrella of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and being able to try to understand best practices from a mobility perspective. So it's really good. I do want to point out, because I now that I have the wide view of your camera here, we've got Ryan's Slow Streets sign in the background there, which does date back to your time in Oakland, obviously. And it also dates back to the other reality of your tenure there, is you showed up and we're probably on the job just a couple of years or so, and then all of a sudden the pandemic happens, and I'll let you take it from there in terms of explaining Ryan's Slow Streets.
Yeah, that's a really lovely parting gift from my team in Oakland. Yeah, so we're pretty much exactly talking today, by March 6th, 2025, 5 years from when, the news was trickling in about COVID-19. Shutdowns really began third week of March 2020. And, cities were really struggling with kind of what actions to potentially take to protect their communities. We started to see people in Oakland literally, as they approached one another on sidewalks,
right,
cross mid-block from one sidewalk to the other. So to try to avoid the spread of COVID-19, there was a lot of talk that maybe there should be, major kind of ciclovia style street closures where, prominent streets would be pedestrianized as a way to provide kind of safe, socially distant space for gathering, but not being close to one another. And the health officials in all of our cities were like, that's actually an attractive nuisance. You don't want to have these kind of events where everyone comes to the same place.
Right.
So while we wanted to find this opportunity to create that space, you either needed to be big or not do it at all. And so under Mayor Schaaf's leadership in Oakland, we announced a plan to basically take our recently developed bike plan, the neighborhood bike routes, and to aggressively restrict to local traffic only a whole series of streets. We eventually did 21 miles of streets to restrict it to through traffic and invite joggers, walkers, dog walkers, little kids on micro scooters, hopscotchers into the roadway for what we called Oakland slow streets. And we happened to be one of the first to make it that big of a move in the country, and really helped catalyze, kind of the way NACTO does, a number of tailored applications of these ideas to cities around the country.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that too, that, kind of NACTO started, as well as a couple of other organizations, started really paying attention to what other cities were doing globally in response to that. And then a lot of the learnings that came from that, are part of the playbook now of how can you move lighter, quicker, cheaper to do some interim strategies and then be able to go to the next step, because, that's kind of the legacy of what we saw happen. Some of those slow streets here, it was called healthy streets. Some of them have lived on. And so, that's one of the kind of positive sides of what was a very traumatic and a very negative experience going through a global pandemic. So, yeah, it's funny too. Yeah. 5 years from now, literally 5 years from this week. That's crazy.
Well,
it seems like it's so long ago, but it's so close. It feels like it was just yesterday.
What is time? It's either forever ago and yesterday. Who knows? But yeah, just to sort of bring it back a bit to NACTO, that's the accelerant that NACTO is. We compile those best practices, those leading practices, because we've created community among the people doing that same job in cities around the country. They share their best practices with one another, and NACTO can compile it and put it out as best practice guidance, which will then sort of goes back to those cities and members and helps accelerate the adoption. And it also helps accelerate the acceptance in guidance and policy and in standard making, so that these things that were once seen as kind of wacky and out there become standard best practice, almost ho-hum.
Yeah, absolutely. And for folks, if you're interested in learning more about that experience, the Oakland experience and what went on, I did have the opportunity to actually interview Warren Logan a couple of years ago. It was back in 2022 for this episode. That would have been episode number 158 in season 4. And so I encourage you to go that. Warren was your partner in crime there of trying to bring those forward. And Warren and I ended up talking quite a bit about some of the learning experiences that you guys had, and the fact that, we were all kind of, monitoring what's going on, and the fact that you guys were one of the fast movers, got some stuff going, and then that really prompted a lot of other cities to feel bold enough to dip their toe in the water. And very soon after, our city council did a resolution to the city staff to do the same, follow suit, figure something out. And I think they ended up doing 5 different installations at various locations around the city. And we don't need to get into the details of all of that, but
I will jump in just to say, he was a partner, not a partner in crime, because while we were aggressive, we made sure everything was legal and appropriate.
Yeah. Ooh. Especially for the international audience, we don't mean literally a partner in crime. That's right. But really, we're here to talk about NACTO and the organization. For those people who are especially tuning in internationally, that may be like, NACTO, what is this? So Ryan, what is this? What is NACTO really? And bring us back to the beginning, because you talked a little bit about the origins of your career in there at New York City DOT and working there, and you referred to it as a NACTO city. Was it a NACTO city at the time, or is NACTO something that came about after your tenure there?
Yeah, so NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, it's existed in some form since the mid 90s, but really this moment of change and leadership that you saw in cities like New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., in the sort of mid-aughts was when the NACTO we know today really started to come to be. It was really formed to make sure cities had a voice in, for example, federal transportation policy when the reauthorization bill would come up every 4 years. But it really evolved in this sort of 2007 to 2012 period to be this place where a community was formed among those people fighting those same fights and trying those same tools, like protected bike lanes, like street redesigns, road diets, where we could share best practices with one another, get them compiled and get them out there, and then get them accepted by the powers that be, whether that be state DOTs or federal officials, and adopted into either putting out our own design guidance in comparison to the existing design guidance, or fighting to get some of the principles and ideas that are in that design guidance in officially accepted policy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's when I really started to see NACTO bubbling up in my sort of radar, was the urban street design guide, and really starting to understand that. The very first version of the design guide that we're going to be talking about here, I got to reach down and grab it. This one here, which we've been also super, super excited to see. And I think that it was really very refreshing to start to see some organization coming up with urban street design guidance that's something other than just, bowing down to the god of LOS, of moving as many vehicles as possible through a city. Gee, maybe we want people to be able to enjoy the street and maybe stay a while.
Yeah, no, the guidance that was out there was not very city friendly and didn't allow for creativity and context, although there was a lot of gray areas in those design guidance. I had to work a lot with the MUTCD, the manual and uniform traffic control devices, and cities could there were two ways to go. If it wasn't in there, it wasn't allowed, or if it wasn't in there, you could maybe do it, since it didn't explicitly say you can't do it. So right. Cities were in this kind of they had to choose, and depending on the comfort level of maybe your chief legal officer or your chief traffic engineer, you would be stuck with one, either being very conservative or willing to try new things. And what NACTO's design guidance allowed for was to be oh, look, another city does it. Here's a picture of it in another city. And then here's in print, in ink, how you could do it and why it makes sense to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you weren't with the organization back in those early days when the first iterations of these guides were coming out. This is the third edition of it. But when I had the conversation with Bill Schulteis talking about the AASHTO Bike Design Guide, Bicycle Facilities Design Guide that just recently came out, we had that discussion of the fact that NACTO really was pushing the envelope and really forcing them to up their game and get with it, because it was kind of embarrassing, in 2012 when they, pushed theirs out and the second edition of the NACTO guide came out, and yours was way more innovative and much more in line with best in practice guidance that we see in Europe. So good on you guys for being there. And again, this particular edition of it is even better than what came out in 2012. So we're starting to incrementally and slowly catch up to, especially what the Dutch have known and the Crow manual that they have in terms of bicycle facilities design guidance. We're getting there. This is the first step, or the second step. The next step is we need to actually get it on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say that, I might not have been on staff at NACTO, but it's worth mentioning the development model that NACTO uses. Cities innovate, and I was at, an innovative city under the leadership of Jeanette Sada Khan. Other cities were innovating, and we participated in the compiling of these best practices, which then NACTO kind of published and championed. And the way that processes work now, that gave the permission slip. And we now have over 100 cities who've done, for example, protected bike lanes in North America. But in doing that over the last 10 years, since that first guide came out, they've all learned from those attempts of what is good from a design perspective. Also, what are the constraints, and what are the capacity constraints, or what's the leadership you need? What's the support on staffing, on community engagement, on what are the best practices for planning? And what we've done now with this new third edition of the Bike Guide is again compiled all of those learnings from putting the last edition of the Bike Guide to work and putting it out on the street. All of those learnings now come in and get gleaned and put out in this new third edition.
Yeah. And just to be clear too, I mean, it's one thing to be able to create design guides and have the guidance in place, but we have to put this in the context of understanding that we basically have 80 years, 100 years almost of history of really the designing and the guidance that have been put in place, that have been created through transportation and traffic engineering, have really been all about cars and movement of cars. And Professor Wes Marshall and I, had this conversation because he, in his most recent book, Killed by a Traffic Engineer, he dives deep into the history of understanding, well, how the heck did we get where we're at right now, where everything is so, the brain is so car focused. And the very first thing that we have on screen here, item here, says reimagining the city streets. He's like, what do we have to do to actually start reimagining what these city streets are? And you see my coffee mug. My opinion is that streets are for people, and we need to really start reversing some of that damage of the 80 plus years of the guidance that has been in place from the engineers and from the designers to basically serve the one thing: moving as many cars through as quickly as possible, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the recognition that this work is a reflection of our values, right? And our leaders ostensibly glean the values from the voters, and then they sort of tell the technocrats and the engineers and planners to sort of implement those values. So what are our values? And the streets are in essence a manifestation of those. And is it connection? Is it safety? Is it access and opportunity and fairness? Or is it individuality? Is it just focused on the efficiency of moving metal boxes from A to B? And ultimately, the engineers are going to do what they're asked to do by their leaders. And that's why I just want to sort of highlight that when you look, one of the essential ingredients of successful cities that have put a lot of these things to work is that leadership and vision that you get from mayors, from city council people, from elected officials who sort of articulate this vision and are willing to put some resources to help make it happen.
I'm really glad you framed it that way too, because one of the things that I try to emphasize here on the channel is that we can help our leaders out by really bringing our voice up and speaking up and coming together in community groups at whatever to speak up and let them know. Because if we just leave it to the loudest voices that, speak up when there's change out on streets, our leaders, our city leaders, they end up just hearing from the people who want the status quo of drive everywhere for everything. So it's an imperative for community members to understand, educate themselves about this, and then come together en masse and let the elected officials, let our leaders know that this is really important to us, because they can't send the marching orders to the DOT directors like you were. And unless you have a sense that the community is there with you, because this is a democracy. Ultimately, the leaders just can't say from on high, this is what we're doing. There's no discussion about it. I mean, there has to be a lot of community engagement, and the more engaged community members, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's why this work is so fascinating, because it's a mix of both. It's not or and, it is and instead of or. Yes, design standards and traffic engineering has had, an incredible limiting factor on what we could achieve with our streets, but that in many ways happened because it was sort of popular. It was allowed for by leadership. It was thought that this was potentially the best way to serve the public, that this kind of way, built form and way of getting around would lead to the best outcomes. But I think what we've really learned, and what we need to do, is keep learning and adjusting. What we've learned is that the disconnection, the car dependence, the expense, the cost, the costs of maintaining the infrastructure, the cost in terms of people's time, the inability to actually address traffic congestion with more and wider roads, that we need to kind of learn what we lost in building that way and set a new course forward, and a more multimodal transportation system in which people have options of walking, biking, using public transit, in addition to driving, is ultimately good for the entire community, even those who do drive, because the last thing you want is every single person down to a junior in high school has a job at Starbucks to have to drive their own car to their job or their school for everything that they do.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to skip through a few of the things that you guys have under our work tab to really kind of look at the types of things that you guys are working on there, and how you're supporting the official NACTO cities. And why don't you address that? Why don't you talk about what is an official NACTO city, and what are unofficial NACTO cities, and how can they become official NACTO cities?
Oh, yeah. Love that question. So a member agency pays annual dues to NACTO and becomes a member. So typical members are the New York City Department of Transportation, the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. We also have some transit agency members. We have nearly 100 members. And once an agency is a member, anyone working in that government agency are sort of part of the NACTO community and part of the NACTO members. And so we have tools that can connect them on topic areas to one another. They can easily send an email that is received. If you're the bike planner in Long Beach, California, you can send an email, and the bike planner at the other 99 agencies can read that, and if they have the answer to that question, they can share that. We convene those groups, what we call peer networks, on a quarterly basis. We get them together on Zoom so that they can share what the most pressing issue is for them that they're facing, and get presentations on what the latest best practices are. So the NACTO membership, we're really developing this collaboration and this connection among the membership. And we put on an annual conference every year, the Designing Cities Conference. The first one was in 2012 in New York. It's at a different member city every year. And that is a place where, rather than on Zoom, all of those members come together and connect with one another and learn what the best practices are. So our website, which was recently redesigned, NACTO.org, has a section on membership. We have a membership brochure. Pretty much, any government, a city agency in charge of its streets or operating as public transit can look into joining NACTO. But really, we're looking for places that want to sort of share this vision for a safer, more sustainable, more equitable transportation system that is not focused on the single occupant vehicle and auto dependency. And so if you want your city to be that way, you should really join NACTO, and joining has that acceleration capability by getting access to that technical assistance and knowledge that exists in the whole NACTO community.
Yeah. Now, in the beginning, it seemed as if it was literally just like a who's who of the largest cities in the nation. But then I started seeing some smaller city names, as like is it sort of like an adjunct member or something like that, or
Affiliate is the term.
affiliate? Yeah, talk a little bit about that, because I used to live in like Boulder, Colorado. 130,000 people. It's probably not that level of your typical member city. How does that all work?
Yeah, so you're right. In the beginnings, it was the larger cities sort of coming together as a smaller community. But as the interest level grew, there were smaller cities that were interested in joining. So we have a tiered system in which the dues are adjusted based on your size, and so the full member cities happen to be they're the cities with populations of over 400,000. They're central to their region, and they're in a region of 2 million or more. The affiliates are all the other members in that don't meet that criteria, including our transit agencies. And we do have 5 international affiliates that are in Canada.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay. With all that stage being said, I want to go back to the work that you guys are doing so that people know what they're getting their money for when they do become a member city. Is, again, reimagining the city streets. We talked a little bit about that. Successful, supporting the successful agencies. You had mentioned this earlier of like that practitioner collaboration, the fact that you're able to have sort of that listserv sort of environment and feeling like you have a cohort of other professionals. I want to linger on this one right now because it's topical and in the news right now with federal policy stuff going on. I know that you just had a major release or announcement just in the last couple of days talking a little bit about stuff along this line. Why don't you kind of set the stage for the work that you guys are doing right now in sort of the reality of a great deal of uncertainty in terms of, especially at the federal level with policy?
Yeah, so NACTO, again, convenes its members and identifies the roadblocks to successful multimodal transportation systems with their streets. And there's sort of 2 elements of that. One is cities are at the bottom of the food chain in the transportation funding scheme. The federal government, with going back to the creation of the interstate system with its 90% match for the building of this 70,000 mile interstate system, is a major funder. That funding trickles primarily state DOTs and then somewhat to the MPOs, the regional planning associations, and then down to cities. So NACTO has been a champion for more funding for cities to get from this system.
No, before you go on that, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. It was, I think I remember the post is really encouraging those federal dollars to be able to get more streamlined and more directly to the cities that need the money. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, there could be direct support the way sort of other policy areas like the community development block grant in the housing world goes money straight to cities, but instead there's money goes by formula to states and then hopefully makes its way down to cities. Now, remember, cities often have the most right of way to manage, all the local streets, so all the sidewalks. So when you see crumbling sidewalks, lots of potholes on streets, but then you have a freeway system that is like, glistening and well-maintained, and you never hit a pothole on the freeway system. That's a reflection of the funding system. So what we have seen in the prior administration and building on some prior administrations is the development of grant programs, competitive grant programs, where there were certain goals and criteria of those grant programs, whether that was reconnecting communities or safe streets and roads for all, in which cities could compete and get that money directly from the federal government. And what we've highlighted is the benefits of that. There's been a lot of great projects that have moved forward thanks to those programs. So the one plank is the overall sort of funding concerns and hoping to continue some of the progress that we saw in the prior administration of programs that got money directly to cities. But the second is around design flexibility. This issue of that the policies that are out there at the federal level tie the hands of cities who have much more complicated context to deal with than sort of what the blank piece of paper that sort of standards deal with. So we've been quite effective in being a voice for reforming and improving things like the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So we helped win a number of improvements to the MUTCD, which is a complicated document that was revised. There was a new 11th edition that came out in December of 2023. And what we do kind of at the federal level is we're also helping people understand what that changed language means and how that could lead to, for example, speed limits being set in a manner in which the fastest drivers don't set the speed limit, but instead reflect the context of there being schools and churches and businesses on a corridor, that give communities the flexibility to put in crossing treatments where prior they would cite these design standards, say, well, the manual doesn't let me add a crosswalk here or provide a safe crossing. So that's really the two thrusts that we work on sort of a national policy level.
Yeah. And, I clicked on through to the policy priorities of the organization, and we see these enumerated right here of the top 7 of those policy principles and priorities. We're recording this on March 6th. This episode is going to be released next Friday on March 14th. We're in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, as I mentioned earlier. As an organization, kind of share with us what you are, kind of doing, because I'm sure you're hearing a lot, from your member cities of a lot of programs to feel like they don't know what's going on. I'm sure you don't have a crystal ball, but please do share with the audience what you can say and what you do know, what you guys are working on.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say I've spent most of my career as a public servant and didn't think I would be a public servant working in government. That those first years in New York City, I was in finance. And, a lot of people, this almost a foreign idea of like working for government. And what we're seeing right now is sort of attack on just this concept of public service. And it's incredibly damaging and disheartening, frankly. And, NACTO is, we want to be part of a coalition of groups saying like public service, like we need public goods, we need public servants, and we need public services in order to sort of survive as a community. And it's amazing that these things that seem obvious have to be restated. And so broadly, that's what we're seeing in terms of the specifics. Like you said, it's very much a moving target. And what we're doing is convening our members and making sure we're listening so everybody knows, did you have a signed grant agreement from this program? Is the money showing up? Has your grant been canceled? or there's a new round of grant applications. Are the grants being awarded? Are the claims being processed for your existing grants? It's very uncertain when you don't know if the colleague you worked with in the regional office is still going to be there when you send your next update email. So, we want to make sure we have a real-time understanding of kind of what conditions are so that we can react accordingly. Unfortunately, those real-time conditions are very unclear. You'll see something in the news, then there'll be, something around a court case that says, that's not actually happening. But I do want to emphasize here that a lot of what you've seen, the exciting work you've seen in cities around the country, the things you see pictures of in our Urban Bikeway Design Guide version 3, they're not dependent on federal funding. And they didn't necessarily get funded by federal funding. In a lot of ways, the most creative things, you wouldn't want federal funding attached to it because there's a lot more eyeballs on it and sort of hoops and paperwork that it has to go through for it to get on the ground. So
it's a lot harder.
So, we're also focused on supporting our cities because they have to show up and do the work every day, regardless of what's happening in Washington, D.C. They have to find a way to repair the sidewalks, fill the potholes, stripe the crosswalks, put pick up the down stop signs that a car crashes into, make sure the traffic signals are still flashing red, yellow, green. And so they have to do that work, and we have to support them and help them figure out a way to keep that work going. And they really are bulwarks against this idea that government can't do anything right, because local government is the thing that people see every day, whether the trash is picked up, whether the pothole is filled, whether, like I said, the crosswalk is faded or been striped. So we can be part of the sort of hopefully the pendulum swinging in this other direction of trust in public services, public servants, and public goods.
Yeah, I'm really glad you framed it that way too, because I come back to this frequently as one of the core tenets here on the channel is talking about the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, is as community members, getting together, speaking up, letting your leaders know that this is of value for you, that you want safer streets, that you want more people-oriented places. And what kind of goes along with that, and to your point, is that the cities that I've been documenting over the years that are making the most ground in terms of transforming their environment, they're also dipping into their own pockets. They're agreeing to support the bond measures at the local election level. The same thing that's happened here in Austin. I had Ted Siff on, who has been involved here in Austin, since the 1980s, of pulling bonds together. And he tallied them all up and said that it's close to $2 billion worth of bonds for trails and pathways and bikeways and those types of active mobility facilities that the city voters have approved, dating back to the 1990s. And so I do want to reemphasize what you're saying and say absolutely. It's not that the grants aren't helpful and the federal money isn't helpful, but it is much more cumbersome. It's more difficult to get going. It obviously gets all the attention and helps out tremendously on really, really big projects. But, the bread and butter types of things, the nut and bolts, oftentimes is actually funded at the local level.
That's right. And if I could build on that, people think that in Oakland, forming a DOT, reorganizing, sometimes you'll see advocates just champion for that reorganization. But the reorganization, people said, we formed a DOT and look, the streets got paved and there were bike lanes striped and traffic circles. But the forming of the DOT also came with a bond measure. It said this is going to be important organizationally, so we'll have organizational focus on it, but it also needs to come with resources. And to bring it back a little bit to NACTO, we do have resources like Structured for Success that look at kind of agency structures and means and methods for helping cities succeed in creating the outcomes that they're looking to make. And ultimately, the local government is just a exercise in the prioritization of limited resources. And, where are you going to devote those? Where are you going to devote them geographically? What are you going to prioritize in so many ways? So, we really want to be lifting up when we see cities leading and making bold, courageous, innovative choices in how they do that work of prioritizing limited resources.
Yeah. Speaking about the funding and shifting over back to the Urban Bikeway Design Guide that just came out, one of the things that I loved about the book, going through it, is from a funding perspective, you make the point of making sure to reinforce with cities, you gotta fund the maintenance and upkeep of these things as well. It's not just about having a nice design guide and building it. You actually have to be thinking about the structure of your funding sources, of your DOTs and of your public works departments and of your bikeway programs and pedestrian programs to actually upkeep and maintain and keep them moving. That's what I was super excited to see that addressed in the manual, in the design guide. What are you super excited about? What really, when you look at this image and you start smiling, it's like, what gets you really excited about this edition?
There's a lot, but I'll say the earlier edition was really inspiring, and sometimes advocates would then bring it to like a city council person and a mayor who would then come to an agency and say, hey, can you do this? Which is great. It's clearing having that leadership of having a mayor or a city council person say, can we have these kinds of bike lanes or bike facilities in our community, is a great thing as someone who's in an agency to hear. We have that in this edition, but it now goes in both directions. There is content in this guide that says to said mayor, said community advocate, said city council person, that says, how can you set up your agency for success? What are the ingredients it needs in order to rapidly develop in all ages and abilities bike network, to develop safe streets that are truly equitable and accessible? And so, there's a in essence, a board game. There's a page where you can assess yourself. What level are you at in terms of the people in your agency? What level of policy are you at? What level of your skill and community engagement, your ability to plan, your ability to design and deliver? Do you have the contracts in place to do all the striping? How capable are you in project evaluation? And so when you see, well, if you want to build in 10 years a true all ages and abilities bike network, well, then you better get your department to level 3 on all of those things. You can assess yourself and say, well, we don't have enough staff, or we don't have enough contracts. We don't have the policy in place, the supportive policy. And so that element of those ingredients that you could really look at and kind of assess a city and sort of identify what you're truly missing,
right,
excites me.
Yeah. The other kind of fun thing that I loved seeing, because I spend a lot of time over in Europe and a lot of time in the Netherlands, was the integration of, and this is getting a little bit wonky and kind of in the weeds of it, but is just seeing it is just makes me smile, is the detailed guidance on building protected bike lanes into roundabouts. It's like, finally, someone in North America is like realizing the potential that has there, because I think some cities, start to understand roundabouts and they start to do them. You've got Mayor Brainerd over in Carmel, Indiana, who, built over 100 roundabouts, but they were all roundabouts that were so car-brained. They're just, the dimensions are wrong. But it was wonderful to see, in the manual, in the design guide, starting, I think, at like 260 something pages in, is like going through the roundabout. So that's more that for me, I think, was one of the neat things to be. I was actually surprised to see it, and delightfully surprised that it was there. So any other things that really have you sort of stoked like that? So.
Yeah, we have a section on advisory bike lanes, which you don't see, in lots of cities, but we have some cities that are doing it, and we provide, I think, really strong guidance that could help other places adopt advisory bike lanes. And then the other, just stepping back, you mentioned kind of the visuals, like a couple things. One of the things that, the early editions of the guide, 2012, 2014, they were inspiring, and they were sort of very visual. They had photographs and renderings. It's amazing that, 10, 12 years later, how dated they started to look. And now that you can compare them to the visuals that you see in this guide, it's really just multiple levels ahead. So great to combine great technical information with really clear, inspiring visuals. These sort of axonometric views that you have here will line up with a plan view in its color scheme and layout that really kind of walk you through and so bring you from a vision of what you could have to how to get there. And that's really, so what we've been saying about this guide, that prior versions might have been like a kit of parts. Here's the elements of your bike lanes that you might have, widths and stencils and things. This new one is really a how-to guide, right? It also provides the steps in the recipe, not just the elements and the ingredients. So that up leveling that you see visually and content is what excites me.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the advisory bike lanes as well. Also, they go under the name of edge lane roads. And for folks that have been following the channel for a while, I did an entire episode with Michael Williams on that, who is the North American edge lane road expert, so self-proclaimed, but he probably has more knowledge on them than anybody. So if you're really interested in understanding what the advisory lanes are and the edge lane roads, be sure to go check out that episode. I'll leave the link in the show notes below. To kind of wrap us up, I want to bring us full circle back to the Designing Cities conference that's coming up. So it's coming up in May. You sort of alluded to it. It moves around from city to city to city. I believe back in, it must have been 2015, I think it was in San Francisco. And then I think the next year it was, where was 15, it in 2015?
14 was San Francisco and 15 was you in Austin.
Fantastic. There you go. I just had the date. Oh, that's right. It was literally when we were doing the move. That's right. So 14 and
I
then
know
we
because
had
the Mets
15.
were in the World Series.
And we had a tornado during NACTO conference here. So remember that? But share a little bit about the conference. I think it's one of the most important conferences that people should prioritize if you're in this world. I've been able to attend a couple of them. I was up at Toronto as well and did some video work, and I've produced some videos of the workshops, on bike workshops and all that during a couple of the different conferences. But share a little bit about the spirit of the conference and what we could look forward to here in Washington, D.C. in May.
Yeah, so it's called the Designing Cities Conference. People refer to it as the NACTO Conference, but it's really the Designing Cities Conference. And it's a rare transportation conference that sees the bigger picture of what we're trying to serve, that we're serving people, serving cities, serving communities. It is primarily attended by about 70% of the attendees are people who serve at our member cities. So it really has this connection element where, again, you see your doppelganger who has that same job as you in a city on the other side of the country. You get to connect with that person and share stories, best practices, and really connect and learn from one another. And NACTO just has such a fabulous team. I've been there since June, so I inherited a very fabulous team that is so dedicated to making these 4 days just so meaningful to the people to attend. It's, as someone who attended the very first one in New York City in 2012 and has been at pretty much every single one, when you're in your government job in the city with getting 200 emails a day and so many requests and struggling with procurement and community pushback on your project, the ability to sort of remove yourself from that for a couple days and connect with other people who are doing that same work is incredibly meaningful and can fill, the vision is it fills your cup and keeps you motivated and inspired for the rest of the year until the conference comes around again and you need that recharge. So just like our design guidance, we curate the event to make sure that the latest best practices are highlighted and you're going to learn and be exposed to the most exciting things that are happening in cities around the country. So this year's conference is in Washington, D.C. It's May 28th through 31st, like you're sharing there. The ability to register is registration's open right now. So it's a good time if you're planning your spring schedule to consider coming and checking out Designing Cities.
Yeah, like I said, I highly recommend it. I think the one in Toronto, some of the best parts of it are actually the workshops and getting out into the environment and seeing some of the stuff that's out there. I'll have to dig up those videos because I published them, but they're not out on the YouTube channel now, so I may have to republish those one of these days. So.
Yeah, and that's I neglected to mention that a core element is I think a lot of conferences have developed tours as part of their conference program, but from the beginning, almost 50% of the time you're in our host city, seeing things on the ground, learning from the people who figured out how to get it on the ground and why they made the choices that they made. And so we should have the trademark to the term walk shop, but we have, numerous walk shops that might be on foot, on bike, sometimes on transit, or even boat, to that you go out. So you learn both in the conference center and out in the city that's hosting us. And we're excited that DOT in Washington, D.C. is our co-host in 2025.
Oh, the very active towns of you. Let's get out and go for a walk or a bike ride. I love it. Ryan, is there anything that we haven't yet covered that you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I would say that, just to maybe step back, maybe we didn't get to why this is important, why I think people should have this textbook called the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, why we're doing this work. It's like, if we do this work, if our communities succeed, our communities will be safer, they'll be more accessible, they'll be more equitable, they'll be more sustainable, but they'll be healthier and happier too. And we're not in a particularly happy time, the data is saying that, and we've been disconnecting from one another. And we really have this vision and think that this work is part of putting us back together, being connected, being healthier and happier.
Yeah. And I did want to point out, too, we're mostly talking about the Urban Bikeway Design Guide today because it's the most recent one that's come out. But you guys have some amazing other guides. I mentioned earlier the Urban Street Design Guide, but you also have Designing Streets for Kids as well, and also the Transit Street Design Guide also out there in city limits. So, folks, do check out the entire suite of the NACTO design guides. I believe they're all published through Island Press. Is that correct?
Yes, published through Island Press. And, because we want this gospel, if you will, to spread, you can find the content on our website, but not in the same form as the book. I strongly recommend that the books, they're very affordable on Island Press's website, but they're really inspiring. And
I was just going to mention that too. I'm glad you said it, is that, these are very, very affordable, especially when you compare it to the AASHTO Bikeways Facility Design Guide, which will be 10x the cost of what you can get these. So Island Press is a fantastic publisher. They are a nonprofit, and they put out some great work. And Ryan, this has been so much fun catching up with you here today, and I look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. for the conference.
Great. I really appreciate you having me and highlighting NACTO in your podcast. And see you in Washington.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Ryan Russo. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And again, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on that support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options, including becoming an Active Towns Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all my video content. Well, until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And a huge shout out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel via YouTube Super Thanks, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. I could not do this without you. Thank you all so very much.